red apples and some pears. Well, here we are, the end of apple processing season. Even got a few pears to work with today. We're going to be making 2 versions of crockpot applesauce along with 4 different methods of using the dehydrator. I've been processing and making test batches for about 3 weeks now, just so I can put a measurement to exactly what I do. Typically it's a little of this, a little of that. There's a lot of different variables such as the sweetness of the apple. Red apple is going to be sweeter in this case than the green apple. But at the same time, the green apple, it starts out a little bit tart and then it sweetens up over time. We're late in the season. We're not going to need as much sugar because the starches in this apple have converted already to sweet sugar. By processing as many apples as possible, it ensures us that we'll have as much flavor as possible during the winter when I'm making my breads, pancakes, or even flavoring up my oatmeal, which can be quite bland without a little bit of apple added to it. Apples are also a good source of vitamin C, potassium, even copper, provided your soil isn't depleted of copper, but that's something that we'll talk about in future videos. It's going to require a little bit of cooking by feel. The dehydrators take about 7 pounds of apples a piece. The crock pot's about 14 pounds of apples. Always get more than what you need because you're going to be snacking on these because there is some goodness involved here. It's really cold out here and I think my cooking times are going to be extended. Keep in mind that ambient temperature is going to be a big factor in how long all of this is going to cook. That being said, I better get to it. Now, back in the day, I used to take a knife and I used to just skin the apple, and as you can see that my hands are cold, knife works a little bit slow. What I'm trying to point out is this is a very ineffective method. You still have to core it. We'll put the knife to the side for a minute and we're going to get out the apple peeler. This is a very inexpensive tool and it's going to increase your productivity. If it's within your means, this is something that you want to pick up if you're doing any type of volume. It's referred to as an apple peeler, but it's a spiral cutter. We've got a front blade that's going to do the spiral. We've got the prongs that are going to hold the fruit. And we've got a floating blade that's going to peel that apple. Oh, I forgot to mention, we're going to be doing pears. You can also use it to peel potatoes. You just take this front blade off, which is the spiral cutter, and this floating blade peels that potato for you. I'm curious on if it can peel a beet, but I don't have any beets around. The machine has a really strong suction cup, but it has a disadvantage as it won't work as well on a textured surface. My processing table has just that, a textured surface. But what I like to do is to put a couple drops of dish soap on there, give it a good smush around, and it locks in. I can lift this entire table up. Another handy tip would be to use cooking spray. Give it a shot on all the blades, all the moving parts, and that way you have easy sliding. By using a little bit of cooking spray, it's going to help things move along a little bit better. Blades are going to stay sharper, and most importantly, it's going to stay cleaner. Oh, we only came out to the orchard because it's a little bit nicer than my kitchen, but if you're working in the kitchen using a Pyrex dish, a 13 by 9 or even a cookie sheet, that'll contain a lot of the mess and a lot of the juices that make this a real sticky job. I'm also going to ask you to use a wooden cutting board because it's going to be easier on your knives. Don't use glass or plastic. That's got a hard edge, and when you cut through, you're just going to end up dulling your knife, making it that much sooner before you have to put a new edge on the knife. Our 2 versions of crockpot applesauce, those are going to take the most amount of time, so I'm going to get those started first. Once the crockpots are going, we'll circle back around and get to the dehydrated goodness that we're going to make. We're going to stuff these crockpots and get as much yield as possible. Buy a good crockpot. You'll have it for 50 years like this one. I think this is circa 1970s. Probably a prototype. We're going to do low sugar on this first crock pot. We're going to use the sweetness of the red apple and what few pears we have left. This is a favorite of mine because not only is it sweet, it's also low added sugar, which makes me a happy dad. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is identify where the apple core line is. Now, none of this fruit's going to be symmetrical. This isn't the pretty fruit that you're going to get from the grocery store. This is the fruit right off the tree, and we're not going to waste any of it if we can help it. We'll find the center line on the core by putting our finger on the top and the bottom, and we can see that straight line and how absolutely wonky this apple is. But if we stab it, keeping in mind of where our center line is, we can get it to engage and run through without any issues with any core being inside. Now, don't disqualify any of your fruit because there's a few simple bird pecks on there. As long as there's no teeth marks or any obvious insect damage, we can cut out those ugly parts. As we run these through the machine, you'll notice that it's making a spiral cut, which is going to end up being pretty cool at the end. Here's another apple that's misshapen. Identify the core line, put it on the machine. Sometimes it's easier to flip it over. When you get an apple that doesn't want to cooperate, or it's just a little bit too damaged, be real careful when you're pulling it off of the spikes. You don't want to hit this front blade. Another trick to use in this machine is only push the fruit on as far as you think you're going to need it, because to pull it off when it comes over to this side can be quite challenging. On fruit that's less ripe or very firm, you won't have to put it on as far. You'll get a feel for it. And then when we go over to these pears are going to go on all the way. I've done this thousands of times this season. I still mess up occasionally. It's going to happen. For this next part, we're going to test our dexterity a little bit. Now, this makes a spiral cut fruit. You're going to take this top layer and pull it up and push that knife down to remove basically all the skin. Flip it over, take that piece of skin off, and then give it a cut on the opposite side, and that gives us wedges. Grab the fruit, peel it back, find out where that skin ends, get rid of the skin part, flip it over, pull off that part of skin, and cut it down the other side, and we've got wedges. And we're going to fill this crock pot up all the way to the rim. And there's going to be moments where you feel like a pro at this, and then there's going to be other times where you just wonder if your hands even belong to you. Either way, just keep pressing on. A little ugly spot there, so I just went ahead and took a wedge out of it. Try to keep the bees out. When processing these little pears, it's going to be the same thing. I like to remove the stem, but get that core line. Now these are very ripe, so they're going to push pretty much all the way down on the spikes, and you run them through the machine much in the same way. One of the things about pears is they get real grainy if it's early in the season. These little pears are almost pure sugar. You can feel when you put them on the machine that there's very little starch left in them. Everything's converted. Your spiral's not going to be as tight, so just kind of use your hand and shape it the best you can. But when it comes over to the cutting board, just go ahead and break off these pieces with the skin on them. The pears are loaded with sugar, and that's going to mean that they're going to cook down the quickest. So I'm not as concerned about making uniform cuts here. So I'm just going to push through. I've removed as much of the skin as possible, and we'll just throw that directly in the crock pot. And we're not full yet. We still have quite a bit of room here, so I'm going to add some green apples. The sugars aren't as developed in these green apples. I think it's a nice addition because it's going to have a different cooking time, a little bit different texture, and it's going to give it a little bit of tang, which is something that's nice when you have a whole bunch of sweetness. Add a little tart, maybe even a little salt. I didn't figure you needed to watch me do both crock pots, but we've got both crock pots full and we've got the bees' attention. One of the reasons being is I've gotten a head start on some of the dehydrating over here. This dehydrator's on and it smells good. The bees are attracted to the sweetness. Well, the first crock pot we'll prepare is our circa 1970s version. If you remember, this pot was primarily red apples, the pears, along with some green apples to add a little bit of tang. This one we're going to keep kind of low sugar, but not no sugar, because can you really call it applesauce if you don't put a little brown sugar in there? Let's mix up the concoction. That's going to enhance this, but it's not going to overwhelm. I'd prefer that you use too much water. That way at the end you can just crack this lid and let it steam off a little bit. It'll naturally thicken as it cools. I've got about 6 ounces of water here. This is going to allow me to mix my ingredients and pour it over my apples. As we talked about earlier, the apples and pears are extremely sweet. We are going to add some brown sugar just to give it that applesauce vibe. So we'll do 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. And next, just because we're feeling a little bougie, we'll put a little pure vanilla extract in there. We'll add 1 teaspoon. And another one of the necessary applesauce ingredients, according to me at least, is going to be some Saigon cinnamon. So we'll put 1 tablespoon in there. And that's it. We've got 4 ingredients: brown sugar, water, Saigon cinnamon, and some vanilla. You can add some nutmeg or allspice, tune it up, give it a little holiday vibe if you like. I'm just going to shake this up, and you just pour it directly over. Try not to let these bees in there. And we're going to call that good. I'm going to put this on high for about an hour. I'm going to come back, give it a stir, then turn that down to low. We should be done in about 4 to 6 hours. For the crock pot with just green apples, we're going to do that. Well, I didn't rinse this out, so we've got a little extra flavor in here, but we've got about 6 ounces of water. We'll put 2 tablespoons of Saigon cinnamon, along with about a cup of brown sugar. We'll use that same 1 teaspoon measurement as we did before. Vanilla is one of those things that you just don't want to add too much of it. We'll put the cap on and shake it. As far as the amount of sugar that you put in, less sugar is going to be a better option if it's one of your first batches and you're not exactly sure how these apples are going to cook down, what the sweetness level is going to be on the end product. But hey, if you make it too sweet, just call it a pie filling, make some apple fritters. The crowd's going to love it anyhow. And we're just going to pour over our concoction over the apples here. Try not to let any of the bees in. And there we go. And just like the other crock pot, we're going to put this on high for an hour, come back and give it a good stir, then drop it down to low and let it kind of finish up nice, slow and easy. We should all remember how to use the apple peeler, being that it was only a couple minutes ago, but if you don't remember, give me that sweet, sweet watch time and go back and check it out again. Now to load the dehydrators, we're going to do it 4 different ways. We're going to do manufacturer recommendation, the way that I do it, along with 2 snacks that I make my daughter that she absolutely loves. Well, the apples come out the same. They're a spiral cut, just like last time. We're going to test that dexterity once again. We'll find the edge of that skin and push the knife straight down. And that's all we're going to do. We're going to flip it over, take off that other piece of skin, and manufacturer recommendations say that you're not going to overlap any of this fruit. One of my problems with this method is I can eat this much fruit in one sitting. Now, we'll get done a little bit quicker. I don't want to spend all day managing a dehydrator. I've got other things to do on the property. So on this next level, to make things a little bit easier, we're going to hit this with some cooking spray. You will forget. Matter of fact, I just did. So let's go ahead and hit them with the cooking spray. That way when you take them apart, life's going to be that much easier. Well, you saw the non-overlapping method, which is going to take up most of your day if you're manning the dehydrator. Now we're going to load it up my way, for I'm going to overlap everything. When you're loading up the dehydrator in this fashion and overlapping the fruit, you want to make sure that there's appropriate air circulation. So you don't want to pack it to where it's one solid brick of apple. We're going to hit these with sugar. This is 75% granulated sugar, some cinnamon, and some brown sugar all mixed together. This next one's absolutely my favorite, along with my daughter's favorite. She's going to get the top row. I'm going to get the bottom row. Reason being is I'm going to sugar the bottom row. But let's start by doing the apple. And what I'm doing here is I'm overlapping, but I'm overlapping in strips, hence apple strips. When they dehydrate, they're going to stick together. So we're not letting the strips touch each other. When the individual strips dehydrate, you're going to see how they stick together and make a real nice handy snack. We're going to take our sugar mixture, give it a good dusting. This will also help it stick together when it dehydrates and warms up. And there you have it, some sugared apple strips. On this top layer, we're going to do the exact same thing, except for my daughter doesn't get the added sugar. I tend to make these apple strips a little bit smaller hands. And there we have it. We're going to put the lid on this, set it at 135, let it run for about 2 hours, then come back and check and see what the consistency is. Welcome to day 2. As I suspected, the temperatures were just a little bit too cold yesterday, and I didn't get things done until well after dark. Here we are the next morning. It's bright and sunny. It's still in the high 40s, but we can make this work. Let's start out with the dehydrators. The dehydrator on the table is still completely stuffed. We're going to take a look at that in a moment, but for right now, we're going to shoo these bees away and take a look at what's underneath this one. Now, if we did it based on the manufacturer recommendations, this would be about 1 snack for me. That's not going to work. But if we look at tray 2, the one where I overlapped and overloaded and just stuffed it completely, but I left room for circulation, we're talking about probably 2 or 3 times as much. For these 2 rows, got myself a 1-gallon Ziploc bag, and we're just going to toss these in there. Damn, that's good. Before we get to the fruit strips, let's go ahead and switch dehydrators. Same way I did the second layer over here. Just stacked it, made sure I had room for circulation, and here we go. I'm going to grab a different bag, although it's not a new bag because this is my bag. This is the one that I fill up and I snack out of. We've definitely got a lot more fruit going on here. It's a little bit easier to pull apart when it's warm, but I do like the primal feel of ripping the fruit apart. Out of our 7 pounds of apples that we put in here, we're looking at about 2 pounds of dehydrated fruit. Let's get to my daughter and I's favorite, which is the fruit strips. In this case, they're apple strips. These strips, unsugared, they come out this big, perfect for small hands. But you don't want to put them in a bag, so grab one of your containers and just stack them in there. Not all of these will be stuck together. We didn't use sugar on this row, and I used green apples, which has a lower sugar content, so they're less prone to stick together. But, I mean, that's a great snack right there. One of my favorite parts is not all of them cooperate, so I get little bonus pieces. This next row of apple strips these are all mine. I'm not gonna share them. I'm okay with that though. And here we are, we've got beautiful, sugary, delicious apple strips. All in all, I think it was a pretty good haul. We did it 4 different ways. I was able to show you 2 different methods of the apple strips, along with 2 different versions on how to load the dehydrator. My preference is we're always gonna stuff this dehydrator because I've got other things to do around the property, just plain and simple. I can't spend all day manning the dehydrator, but at the end of the day, to come into some warm goodness, oh, so good. And if you made it to this part of the video, you're an absolute champion. I love you for it. Let's take a look at our low sugar applesauce. We've still got a lot of big pieces in here because that's how I prefer it. I'd let this cool off a little bit. We're either storing or putting in the fridge to basically eat directly from. The cool thing about these type of containers is it's very simple. You've got 1 cup, cup and a half, 2 cups. If I want to store this and cook with it a little bit later, maybe I made it too sweet. That's that apple fritter recipe that we're going to mess with later. Once they freeze, I put them in a 1-gallon bag. I can grab 1 cup, a cup and a half, or 2 cups, depending on what the recipe calls for or what I'm feeling like that day. I like my applesauce a little bit chunky. That way, if I do choose to bake some breads, pancakes, I've got a little bit of that apple texture as opposed to more of a mush. But if you're into mush, that's your thing. I can tell you right now that none of this batch is going to be frozen because my daughter's already found out that I made it. Now, if you want to break up this fruit, now would be the time to ladle it into your blender, hit it with a potato masher or even a ricer. They all do a pretty good job. One of the things that we need to do is qualify what I've made here. Did I make it too sweet? Is it going to be pie filling? I know this one only had 2 tablespoons of sugar, so I'm going to take a clean spoon. I'm going to dip it once. No double dipping. Yep, that works. Out of this 7-quart crock pot, we were able to yield 7 cups plus the taste testing that I did, which is about another cup, maybe cup and a half. I was hungry. Well, of the 2 crock pots, I can tell you which one's got the most sugar just based on the amount of bees. I'm gonna lift this up and kind of try to keep everybody from getting mad at me here. There's not much I can do about the bees right now, so we'll take our clean spoon and carefully dig in there around the bees. That too is applesauce. I don't have to call it pie filling because it's just sweet enough without being overbearing. I got all the bees out. I'm gonna make a run for it while I can. Thanks for showing up, y'all. Take care.